There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary: a Tuesday evening, a business transaction, a handshake. They were the camouflage of the mundane, and only later, when you trace the map of your own heart backward, do you see them for what they were: the quiet, unassuming epicenters of seismic change. For me, that moment smelled of expensive wool, a faint trace of gin, and the cold, clean air of a penthouse that felt more like a gallery than a home. It was the moment I agreed to become a ghost, to haunt the edges of another man's life, never realizing that the life I was truly about to alter was my own. The agreement was simple: a performance piece in exchange for a sum of money that felt like a misprint on the page. I was to be Julian Vance's partner, not in business, not in life, but in the most delicate and public of fictions. It began, as most things in Julian's world seemed to, with an email from a subordinate. The message was sterile, efficient, an invitation to a meeting regarding a discreet personal consultation. My work as a photographer, specializing in candid portraiture, had apparently brought me to their attention. They believed my observational skills were an asset. I found this peculiar. Photographers are paid to capture moments, not to create them. I went anyway, driven by a curiosity that outweighed my skepticism. The Vance Corporation headquarters was a blade of glass and steel that sliced the sky, a place where ambition was the ambient atmosphere. I was led to the top floor, to an office that felt less like a workspace and more like a carefully curated declaration of power. And there was Julian Vance. He was not what I had expected. The tabloids painted him as a ruthless corporate titan, a modern Midas whose touch was as cold as the gold it produced. But the man who stood to greet me was quieter, his presence less an explosion and more a gravitational pull. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed molded to his frame, but his eyes held a weariness that the expensive fabric could not conceal. He explained the situation with the same dispassionate clarity he might use to describe a quarterly earnings report. His former fiancée, Amelia Croft, a woman he had been with for nearly a decade, was getting married. Her engagement party was in 3 weeks, a grand affair designed to merge two of the city's most powerful families. He was expected to attend. He was expected to be fine. He was expected, he said with the ghost of a smile that did not reach his tired eyes, to bring a date. It was a matter of optics, a performance for an audience of his peers, his rivals, and the woman who had once promised to be his future. He needed someone who could play a part convincingly. Someone observant, who could read a room and adapt. Someone who would not be starstruck by the wealth or intimidated by the pressure. Someone, his consultant had suggested, like me. Someone who understood the art of illusion, of capturing the appearance of a thing without disturbing its reality. "I need you to be plausible," he said, his voice a low baritone that seemed to absorb the light in the room. He walked over to the vast window that overlooked the sprawling city, a kingdom of concrete and light at his feet. "I need people to look at us and see a connection. Not a grand, theatrical romance, but something quiet, something real. The kind of intimacy that exists in shared glances, in the way a hand rests on a back. Do you understand?" I understood perfectly. He was hiring me to be a piece of set dressing, a human shield against pity and speculation. My role was to be a carefully constructed lie, a story told in subtle gestures and unspoken words. I, a man who made his living capturing authenticity, was being asked to manufacture it. There was a bitter irony in it, a kind of poetic justice that appealed to the cynical artist in me. The pay was, to put it mildly, astronomical. It was enough to fund my own studio, to be free of commercial assignments for years. It was the kind of money that could buy a different life. And so I agreed. I stepped through a door I did not know existed, into a world I had only ever observed from a distance, like a foreign country seen from the window of a passing train. Our preparation was meticulous, a series of meetings that felt more like rehearsals for a play. Julian was a demanding director. He gave me a dossier on his life, a curated history of his relationship with Amelia, and a list of key players who would be at the party. We fabricated a backstory for my character, Elias Thorne, the acclaimed photographer, a plausible fiction woven with threads of my own life. We decided we had met at a gallery opening 6 months prior, a slow-burn romance that had blossomed away from the public eye. It was all so clinical, so detached. We practiced anecdotes, rehearsed conversational gambits. He taught me which fork to use, how to hold a wine glass so the heat of my hand wouldn't warm the Chardonnay, the subtle social codes of a world built on unspoken rules. During these sessions, I watched him. I studied him with the same intensity one would a subject in my studio. I saw the way his jaw tightened when he spoke of Amelia. I saw the flicker of something vulnerable in his eyes when he thought I was not looking. He was a fortress, impeccably constructed, but I was beginning to see the hairline fractures in the stone. The night of the party arrived like a verdict. A car was sent for me, and I was taken back to his penthouse, the place that was to become the stage for the first act of our performance. The apartment was breathtaking, a testament to minimalist perfection. It was a silent, sprawling space of polished concrete floors, vast windows, and art that was worth more than the building I lived in. But it was also sterile, empty. It felt like a space that was inhabited but not lived in. There were no personal photographs, no cluttered shelves, no signs of the beautiful chaos of a life. It was as guarded and impenetrable as the man who owned it. He was waiting for me, standing by the window in a tuxedo that made him look less like a businessman and more like a figure from a tragic romance. He held out a box. Inside was a watch, its face a simple, elegant black, its strap dark leather. "A prop," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "It helps with the story. A gift from me to you." I let him fasten it around my wrist. His fingers were cool and steady against my skin, a brief, professional touch that somehow felt intensely personal. The contact was fleeting, a spark in the cold, cavernous space between us, but it sent a strange current through me. It was the first unplanned moment, the first detail that was not in our script. For a fleeting second, as he adjusted the strap, his eyes met mine, and the mask of Julian Vance, the billionaire titan, slipped. I saw a man who was profoundly, achingly lonely. A man who was about to walk into a room filled with his past and pretend he had a future. In that moment, my role shifted in my own mind. I was no longer just a hired actor. I was the guardian of this man's solitude, the keeper of his quiet desperation. The party was a sensory assault, a symphony of clinking glasses, murmured conversations, and the scent of champagne and expensive perfume. It was held in a ballroom that looked like it had been carved from crystal and starlight. We moved through the crowd, a single entity, my hand resting lightly on the small of his back as we had practiced. He was a masterful performer. He smiled, he laughed, he engaged in the hollow pleasantries of his class. He introduced me with a proprietary warmth that felt shockingly convincing. "This is Elias," he would say, his voice laced with a quiet pride that sent a confusing flutter through my chest. And I played my part. I was attentive, my gaze frequently finding his across the room, a silent question, a shared smile. We were a portrait of contentment, a masterpiece of deception. Then we saw her. Amelia. She was radiant, standing beside her new fiancé, a man with a politician's smile and empty eyes. She looked happy, genuinely happy, in a way that Julian's dossier of old photographs had never quite captured. I felt the change in him instantly. A subtle stiffening of his posture, a sudden chill that seemed to emanate from him. It was as if a string inside him had been pulled taut, vibrating with a painful, silent frequency that only I, standing so close, could feel. He guided us toward them, his grip on my arm tightening almost imperceptibly. The conversation was brief, polite, a masterpiece of civilized torture. I watched Julian's face, saw him construct a smile from memory, heard him offer congratulations in a voice that was perfectly even. He was flawless, but I could feel the tremor in the hand that was now resting on my shoulder. I was his anchor, the physical point of contact that kept him from drifting away on a sea of memory and regret. It was after that encounter that the shift began. Our performance bled into something else, something I had not been hired for. He began to lean on me, not just physically, but emotionally. He kept me close, his hand finding mine under the guise of a romantic gesture, but his grip was tight, desperate. In the quieter corners of the ballroom, away from the prying eyes, the pretense would fall away for a few precious seconds. He would close his eyes, his shoulders slumping slightly, and he would just breathe. In those moments, I was no longer a prop. I was a sanctuary. I found myself wanting to protect him, to shield him from the ghosts that haunted this gilded cage. This feeling was new. It was dangerous. It was not in the contract. We stayed until the bitter end, until the crowd had thinned and the music had softened to a melancholic whisper. In the car on the way back to his penthouse, the silence was a heavy, suffocating blanket. The city lights streamed past the window, painting fleeting patterns on his face. He looked exhausted, hollowed out. The armor he had worn all night had been stripped away, leaving behind a raw, unguarded vulnerability. When we arrived back at the silent, empty apartment, the air was thick with unspoken things. The performance was over. I was supposed to collect my check and leave, to disappear back into my own life, the ghost's work done. I turned to him, ready to say my goodbyes, to sever the strange, temporary bond we had forged. "Well, I suppose that's stay," he said, his voice barely a whisper. It was not a command, but a plea. He did not look at me. He was staring out at the city, a constellation of a million other lives that were not his. "Please, just for a little while. I don't want to be alone right now," and that was it. The moment the carefully constructed boundary between us dissolved. It was a request that went far beyond the terms of our agreement. To stay was to admit that this had become more than a job. To leave was to abandon a man who was clearly drowning. I looked at him, at the proud set of his shoulders that seemed to be the only thing holding him together, and I knew I could not walk away. The money, the contract, the lie, none of it mattered anymore. All that mattered was the profound, undeniable loneliness of the man standing before me. "Okay, Julian," I said softly. "I'll stay." He led me to the living area, a vast space dominated by a low-slung sofa that faced the wall of windows. He did not turn on any lights. We sat in the dark, the city below providing a soft, ambient glow. He poured us both a whiskey, his movements slow, deliberate. He handed me a glass, our fingers brushing for a second longer than necessary. We drank in silence, the only sound the quiet clink of ice against glass. I did not know what to say. The script had run out. We were in uncharted territory now, two strangers bound by a shared deception, adrift in the quiet aftermath of a painful night. I simply sat with him, offering my presence as a silent form of comfort. I had been hired to be a shield, but now, it seemed, my job was to be a harbor. After a long time, he finally spoke, his voice rough with an emotion he had suppressed all evening. She looked happy. It was a simple statement, but it was weighted with a decade of shared history, of love and loss. It was a confession. "Yes," I replied, my voice just as quiet. She did. He finished his drink in one long swallow and set the glass down with a heavy finality. He leaned back against the sofa and closed his eyes. The tension seemed to drain from him, leaving him looking younger, more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. I watched the play of light and shadow on his face, the strong line of his jaw, the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He was beautiful, in a way that was both intimidating and deeply sad. A perfect statue in an empty museum. And I, the quiet observer, felt a powerful, unexpected urge to reach out, to smooth the worry from his brow, to offer a comfort that went beyond my paid role. But I stayed still, my hands clenched around my glass, a silent sentinel in the opulent darkness. This was the beginning of the ritual. That first night, I slept in one of his many guest rooms, a space as impersonal and luxurious as a five-star hotel suite. But the next morning, he asked me to stay for breakfast. And then he found another reason for me to be there. A charity gala. A dinner with business partners. The lines of our professional arrangement began to blur, the edges softening until the distinction was almost gone. The performance for the public became a private reality. I became a fixture in his life, a quiet presence in his vast, empty home. Our evenings fell into a comfortable pattern. We would talk, not about business or social obligations, but about books, about art, about the simple, ordinary things that made up a life. I learned that he had wanted to be an architect before his father's death forced him into the family business. He learned that I saw the world not as it was, but as it could be, a series of potential photographs, of moments of grace waiting to be captured. The physical boundary between us began to erode, slowly, tentatively. It started with him falling asleep on the sofa while we watched a movie, his head eventually coming to rest on my shoulder. The first time it happened, I froze, my entire body rigid with a mixture of terror and a strange, protective tenderness. I did not move for hours, my arm going numb, afraid that the slightest shift would break the fragile spell. I just sat there, listening to the soft, even sound of his breathing, a sound that made his cavernous apartment feel, for the first time, like a home. This became a regular occurrence, a silent agreement. He was exhausted, not just from his demanding job, but from the relentless performance of being Julian Vance. With me, in the quiet darkness of his living room, he could finally rest. He could let the armor fall, knowing I would be there to stand guard. I was living a double life. To the outside world, I was Elias Thorne, the enigmatic artist who had captured the heart of one of the city's most eligible bachelors. But in the quiet hours of the night, I was just Elias, the man who provided a safe space for Julian to simply be. I was falling for him. It was a slow, insidious process, a gradual erosion of my professional detachment. It was in the way he would smile, a rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face, when I told a stupid joke. It was in the way he started asking for my opinion on the art he was considering for his collection. It was in the way his presence began to feel less like a job and more like a necessity, a vital part of my own emotional ecosystem. I was in love with a man who was paying me to pretend to be in love with him. The irony was so profound, so painful, it was almost beautiful. I told myself it was just a role I was playing too well. I told myself that the feelings were a side effect of the manufactured intimacy, a phantom limb of a relationship that was not real. But my camera knew the truth. I had started taking pictures of him, not for a client, but for myself. Candid shots, taken in the quiet moments when he thought no one was watching. Julian reading by the window, the morning light tracing the contours of his face. Julian asleep on the sofa, his features softened, all the tension and weariness of his waking hours erased. These photographs were not of Julian Vance, the billionaire. They were of Julian. They were filled with a tenderness, a longing that I could never voice. They were my silent confession. The ritual of our evenings evolved. The pretense of separate rooms began to feel absurd. One night, after a particularly grueling week of negotiations for him, he was so tired he could barely stand. He simply walked to his bedroom, and I followed, a silent, magnetic pull between us. I helped him out of his jacket, and he sank onto the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. I sat beside him, not touching him, just being there. "Don't go," he murmured into his hands, his voice muffled. "I'm not going anywhere," I promised. I slept in his bed that night, on top of the covers, a respectable distance between us. But in the middle of the night, I woke to find him turned toward me, his hand resting on the mattress just inches from mine. In his sleep, he had sought me out, an unconscious act of trust, of need. I lay there, awake for hours, my heart pounding a frantic, hopeful rhythm against my ribs. I watched the slow rise and fall of his chest, the way the moonlight from the window silvered his hair. The space between us was charged with a powerful, unspoken current. It was a chasm of fear and possibility. I wanted to cross it more than I had ever wanted anything. But I was the hired help. I was the ghost, and ghosts are not allowed to touch. This delicate, painful dance continued for weeks, which bled into months. Our public appearances became less frequent, our private world more consuming. The contract had been extended indefinitely, the payments appearing in my account with a sterile regularity that felt increasingly at odds with the messy, complicated reality of our lives. We had built a life together, a fragile ecosystem of shared silences and quiet comforts. But it was a life built on a foundation of lies, and I knew, with a growing sense of dread, that it could not last. The ambiguity was a slow poison, the not knowing a constant, low-grade ache in my chest. Did he feel anything for me? Or was I just a convenient, comfortable presence, a living security blanket he had purchased? The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday night. There was no event, no public to perform for. It was just us, in the apartment, the rain lashing against the windows, isolating us from the rest of the world. We were on the sofa, a comfortable distance between us, a book open in my lap, another in his. But neither of us was reading. The silence in the room was different tonight. It was not comfortable. It was heavy, taut, filled with the weight of everything we had never said. I could feel his eyes on me. I looked up, and his gaze was so intense, so raw. It felt like a physical touch. The mask was gone. All I saw was Julian, looking at me with an expression of such profound confusion and longing that it stole the air from my lungs. He put his book down, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. He shifted closer, his knee brushing against mine. The contact was electric, a jolt that went straight to my core. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. The air crackled with a static energy, a precipice we had been walking toward for months. "Elias," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. It was the first time he had spoken in over an hour. I could only look at him, my throat too tight to form words. His eyes searched mine, looking for something. Permission? Reassurance? I did not know. He raised a hand, his fingers hesitating for a moment in the space between us before he gently touched my cheek. His thumb stroked my skin, a feather-light touch that was both a question and a confession. The carefully constructed walls I had built around my own heart crumbled to dust. I leaned into his touch, an involuntary surrender, closing my eyes against the overwhelming surge of emotion. "Would it be okay?" he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "If this wasn't part of the job?" Just for a moment, my eyes fluttered open. He was so close now, his face just inches from mine. I could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes, could feel the warmth of his breath on my skin. This was the precipice. I could step back, retreat to the safety of our arrangement, or I could leap, knowing that the fall might break me. I did not answer with words. I closed the small distance between us and pressed my lips to his. The kiss was not passionate or demanding. It was tentative, hesitant, a moment of breathtaking vulnerability for us both. It was a question asked in a language we had both been too afraid to speak. It was the taste of whiskey and loneliness and a desperate, fragile hope. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was a lifetime. It was the shattering of one reality and the creation of another. When we pulled away, we just looked at each other, the truth finally laid bare in the charged space between us. The performance was over, and I had no idea what came next. The morning after was a study in silence. A cold, brittle silence that was a universe away from the comfortable quiet we had cultivated. I woke up alone in his vast bed. The space beside me was cool, the sheets undisturbed. I found him in the kitchen, already dressed in a crisp suit, his back to me as he stared out the window, a coffee cup held in a white-knuckled grip. The armor was back, thicker and more impenetrable than ever before. He did not turn when I entered. He just stood there, a statue of polished denial. "Good morning," I said, my voice sounding fragile in the heavy silence. "Morning," he replied, his tone clipped, professional. He finally turned, but his eyes did not quite meet mine. They focused on a point just over my shoulder. "There's coffee. I have an early meeting. I've arranged for a car to take you home whenever you're ready." It was a dismissal, a polite, clinical severing. My heart, which had been soaring with a terrifying hope just hours before, plummeted. I felt a cold dread spread through my veins. He was erasing it. He was pretending it never happened. He was retreating back to the safety of our contract, to the world where I was an employee and he was the man who signed the checks. "Julian," I started, my voice pleading. He cut me off, his voice sharp. "My assistant has processed a bonus for you, for your exceptional service. Your discretion has been commendable." The word bonus was a slap in the face. It was a deliberate, cruel reduction of what had happened between us to a mere transaction. He was paying me for the kiss. He was paying me to forget it. The hurt was so sharp, so sudden, it felt like a physical blow. All the tenderness, all the vulnerability of the night before, curdled into a bitter, icy anger. Not at him, but at myself. For being a fool. For believing, for even a moment, that this could be real. I see, I said, my own voice now stripped of all emotion. I had to get out of there. I could not stand in this beautiful, empty apartment for one more second, suffocating under the weight of his fear. I walked out of the kitchen, not looking back. I gathered my things, the watch he had given me feeling like a manacle on my wrist. I took it off and placed it on the polished surface of the hall table. A prop, he had called it. That is all it ever was. That is all I ever was. I did not take the car he had arranged. I walked. I walked for miles, the cold morning air a welcome shock to my system. I needed to feel the hard, unforgiving pavement beneath my feet. I needed to be surrounded by the anonymous chaos of the city, to lose myself in the crowd. By the time I reached my own small, cluttered apartment, a decision had solidified in my mind. It was over. I could not continue this way, living in the gray space between reality and fiction, my heart a willing casualty of his emotional cowardice. I was a photographer. My life was about capturing truth, not living a lie. I sent a single, formal email to his assistant. Please consider our arrangement terminated, effective immediately. I did not offer an explanation. An employee does not need to explain his resignation. Then I turned off my phone. I could not bear to see his name, to hear his voice. I spent the next few days in a haze of grief and disillusionment. I went through the photographs I had taken of him, the secret archive of my foolish heart. I looked at the images of him sleeping, of him smiling, of him looking at me in those unguarded moments. The tenderness I had felt when I took them was now a source of profound pain. I deleted them all, one by one, an act of digital self-flagellation. I erased every trace of him from my life, trying to convince myself that he had never been there at all. A week passed. A miserable, silent week. The bonus he had mentioned appeared in my bank account, a vulgar sum that felt like blood money. I transferred it to a charity, every cent. I would not be bought. I tried to work, to lose myself in the familiar comfort of my darkroom, but his face haunted me. The ghost I had been hired to be was now haunting me in return. I was a wreck, and I was furious with myself for letting it happen. I had broken the cardinal rule. I had become invested. I had fallen in love with the subject. Then, one evening, there was a knock on my door. It was late, well after 10. I never had visitors this late. My building was old, with no doorman, no security. I looked through the peephole, and my heart stopped. It was him, Julian, standing in the dimly lit, slightly shabby hallway of my building, looking utterly, completely out of place. He was not wearing a suit, but a simple sweater and jeans, clothes I had never seen him in before. He looked tired, lost, and he was holding a single, framed photograph. My first instinct was to pretend I was not home, to stay silent until he went away. But I was not a coward. I had faced down my own foolish heart. I could certainly face him. I opened the door. We stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching between us, thick with unspoken accusations and regrets. He looked even worse up close. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he had not shaved. The impeccable fortress of Julian Vance was in ruins. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice low and hoarse. I stepped aside, letting him into my small apartment. It was the antithesis of his home. It was filled with books stacked on the floor, prints tacked to the walls, the organized chaos of a creative life. He looked around, taking it all in, as if seeing a part of me he had never known existed. He was holding the photograph out to me. I took it. It was one of the pictures I had taken of him. The one of him asleep on the sofa, the morning light on his face. I had thought I had deleted them all. I must have printed this one and forgotten about it, left it in my studio. His assistant must have packed it with my things. "Why did you leave?" he asked, his voice barely audible. A humorless laugh escaped my lips. "Why did I leave? Are you serious, Julian? You offered me a bonus. You treated what happened between us like a transaction, a service rendered. What did you expect me to do? Thank you for the generous tip and wait for the next assignment. He flinched, the words hitting their mark. I was scared, he admitted, his gaze falling to the floor. I panicked. Everything with you, it felt real. More real than anything has felt in a very long time. And it terrified me. I don't know how to do real, Elias. I only know how to manage expectations, how to control the narrative. So I did what I always do. I tried to put it back in a box. I tried to make it a business deal again, because that is a language I understand. Well, congratulations, I said, my voice cold. You succeeded. You made it perfectly clear where I stand. The help. The hired ghost. No, he said, finally looking up, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading sincerity. That's not what you are. That's not what you ever were. I hired you to play a part, but from the moment I met you, you were the only real person in the room. You were the only one who saw me. Not the name, not the money, just me. And I became dependent on that. On you. On your quiet. On your strength. I was a coward. I pushed you away because getting closer to you felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, and I have always been afraid of heights. He took a step closer, his hands clenched at his sides. These last few days without you. My life, my home, it's all gone back to what it was before. Empty. Silent. Just a collection of expensive things in a beautiful box. You were the one who made it feel like a home. You are the only thing I don't want to lose. I stood there, the photograph clutched in my hand, my heart a battlefield of warring emotions. The hurt was still there, a raw, open wound. But his confession, his raw, unvarnished vulnerability, was a soothing balm. He was not a cold, ruthless titan. He was just a man who was lonely and scared and had made a stupid, terrible mistake because he did not know how to love. I'm in love with you, Julian, I said, the words finally breaking free, raw and honest. And I can't be in your life as a paid companion. I can't live in that gray space. It will destroy me. So you have to choose. Either you want me, all of me, in a real life, with no contracts and no pretense, or you have to let me go. For good. It was an ultimatum, laid bare in the cluttered intimacy of my apartment. The ball was in his court. He could retreat to his fortress, to the safety of his controlled, lonely world, or he could take the leap with me. He looked at me, his eyes searching my face, and for the first time, I did not see fear. I saw a flicker of hope, a dawning of courage. He closed the remaining distance between us, his hands coming up to gently cup my face. His touch was not hesitant this time. It was sure. It was certain. I choose you, Elias, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I choose this. I choose real, and he kissed me. Not a tentative, questioning kiss like the first time, but a kiss of profound, soul-deep relief. It was a promise, a beginning. It was the end of the ghost story and the first sentence of a love story. In the quiet of my small apartment, surrounded by the beautiful chaos of my life, we began to build something real, something that was not for show, something that was just for us. The foundation was no longer a lie, but a shared, terrifying, and beautiful truth. The days that followed were a delicate, careful negotiation of a new reality. We did not fall into an easy, immediate rhythm. There were years of his solitude and months of my guardedness to overcome. It was like learning a new language, where every gesture, every word, had to be redefined outside the context of our original arrangement. He did not go back to his penthouse that night. He stayed with me, sleeping on my lumpy sofa because I was not ready to share a bed again, not until we had untangled the knots of what we had been to each other. He did not complain. In the morning, I found him in my tiny kitchen, squinting at my ancient coffee maker, looking completely bewildered but determined. The sight of Julian Vance, a man who could buy the entire coffee-producing region of Colombia, struggling with a $10 drip machine was so absurd, so tender, it made my heart ache in a good way. We started with coffee. We sat at my small, wobbly kitchen table, and we talked. We talked for hours, not as employer and employee, but as two men trying to find their footing on new, uncertain ground. He told me about the crushing weight of his family's legacy, the loneliness of a life where every relationship was suspect, a potential transaction. I told him about my passion for finding the truth in a single frame, the quiet joy of my solitary work, and the fear I had of letting anyone into my carefully curated world. We laid our vulnerabilities out on the table like priceless, fragile artifacts, and in that shared honesty, we began to build a bridge across the chasm that had separated us. He asked to see my work, the real work, not the portfolio I showed to clients. I hesitated. My personal projects were a map of my soul, intimate and raw. But I took him to my darkroom, the small, chemical-smelling sanctuary where I felt most myself. I showed him the series I was most proud of, portraits of strangers on the street, captured in moments of unguarded emotion. He looked at each print with a quiet, focused intensity, his artist's eye seeing beyond the surface. "You see people," he said, his voice filled with a soft wonder. "Really see them. It's what you did with me, isn't it? From the very beginning, it's all I know how to do." I confessed. He stayed at my apartment for 3 days. We ordered takeout. We walked through my neighborhood, a place of brick tenements and vibrant street art that was a world away from his polished, silent corner of the city. He seemed to breathe easier here, away from the expectations of his name. He was just Julian, a man in a sweater, learning how to make coffee and discovering the joy of a bodega cat. On the third night, as we were washing dishes together in my tiny sink, our shoulders brushing, the awkwardness finally gave way to a renewed, more stable intimacy. He turned to me, his hands still wet, and his expression was open, stripped of all pretense. "I want to go home," he said, "but I only want to go if you'll come with me. Not as a guest, not as a job, as my partner. I want you to mess up my minimalist perfection. I want your books on my floors and your prints on my walls. I want you to make that empty place a home, because it was never a home until you were in it." And so, we went back. Stepping into his penthouse this time felt different. It was not a stage or a gilded cage. It was a space of possibility, a blank canvas. And we began to paint our life onto it. It started small. I brought over a box of my favorite books and left them on his ridiculously expensive coffee table. He did not move them. I hung one of my own photographs in the hallway, a stark, black and white landscape that was the opposite of the abstract canvases that dominated his walls. The next morning, I found him just standing there, looking at it. "It makes the hallway feel less like a hallway," he said, a small, pleased smile on his face. We learned to live together, to navigate the rhythms of each other's days. I discovered his strange habits, the way he organized his sock drawer by color, his obsession with historical documentaries, the fact that he was a surprisingly sentimental drunk. He learned mine, my need for absolute silence when I was editing photos, my habit of leaving half-empty teacups all over the apartment, my love for terrible, old science fiction movies. We were two celestial bodies that had been orbiting each other in a strange, prescribed pattern, and now we were slowly, carefully, finding a new, shared gravitational center. The physical intimacy returned, not with the hesitant, questioning uncertainty of before, but with a deep, grounding assurance. To sleep beside him, to wake up with his arm thrown possessively over my waist, became the most natural thing in the world. The vast bed no longer felt like an empty expanse, but like our own private island. In the quiet hours of the night, we would talk, whispering secrets in the dark, confessions and dreams that had no place in the daylight world. It was in these moments that I felt the last of his walls crumble, the last of my own fears recede. We were not just lovers. We were confidants, partners in the truest sense of the word. Of course, the outside world still existed. The news of our continued relationship was a source of endless fascination for the gossip columns. They wrote about us, speculating, analyzing, but they could never capture the quiet truth of our reality. We made one public appearance together after we had truly become a couple. It was another charity gala, the kind of event that had once been the entire reason for my existence in his life. But this time, it was different. As we stood in front of the flashing cameras, his hand in mine felt not like a prop, but like an anchor. I was not playing a part. I was simply standing next to the man I loved. He must have felt the change, too. He leaned down, ignoring the cameras, and whispered in my ear, Are you happy, Elias? I looked up at him, at this man whose lonely heart I had been hired to guard and had somehow managed to steal, and a genuine, unscripted smile spread across my face. Immensely, I said, and I knew he could see it was the truth. We did not stay long. We made our apologies and left early, escaping the beautiful, suffocating room for the sanctuary of our home. That night, as we lay in bed, the distant city lights painting soft patterns on the ceiling, he turned to me, his expression serious. The contract, he said. The original one. My lawyers still have it on file. I want to burn it, I smiled. I thought I terminated that contract weeks ago. I know, he said, his thumb gently stroking my cheek. But I want it gone. I want no record of that beginning. I want our story to start here. With this. With us, we never did burn the physical document. It did not matter. The old contract had been replaced by a new one, an unspoken agreement written on our hearts. Its terms were simple: to be honest, to be vulnerable, to be present, to choose each other every day, not because of optics or obligation, but because life was simply better, warmer, and more real when we were together. We began to heal in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together. The ghost had found a home, the billionaire had found his heart, and the quiet observer had finally found something true enough to stop watching and start living.